Good afternoon. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. On behalf of Kiran Pastricha and the Aspen Institute and the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, we welcome you. Thanks for making time. In sort of the middle of the workday, we were trying to get a slot later, but as you know, in winter in Delhi, it's hard to get a venue, so we take whatever we get. Beggars can't be choosers. But it's a good reason to have come here. We've got Dr. Arun Majumdar, who until recently was directing the Advanced Research Projects Agency at the U.S. Department of Energy, and prior to that, he was a professor at Berkeley. So before I hand it on to Dr. Majumdar and Mr. Suresh Prabhu, our chairperson, let me just give you a quick introduction to CEEW for those of you who don't know us. We are an independent research institution chaired by Mr. Prabhu, and our objective is to integrate energy, environment, and water issues in all the research that we undertake, as well as the policy advisory work that we undertake for government within India and outside. On the energy side, we did the first independent analysis of the National Solar Mission. We've done work on industrial energy usage in India. We're working on reducing energy requirements in certain industries in India, as well as looking at long-term pathways for reducing carbon from carbon output from industry. We are looking extensively at off-grid energy systems and the financing that would be required to stimulate that market. We look at clean energy subsidies and what kind of global rules are needed to keep them in play without disputes arising. So some of you might have seen our publications. They're here for your viewing. But that should be enough from me. I just wanted to pass on the floor to Mr. Suresh Prabhu, former Union Minister of Power, Environment and Forests, Industry, Public Enterprises, Chemicals and Fertilizers. Also, he chaired the task force on interlinking rivers. In a sense, he has covered it all, energy, environment, and water. And I would request Mr. Prabhu to reflect on why the theme of today's talk, essentially the changing energy landscape, and how it is being shaped in some ways, is important. Before we pass on the floor to Dr. Majumdar, who's really been at the heart of it, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, about which Dr. Majumdar will speak in much more detail, has been the U.S. government's leading institution to invest in transformational, game-changing, horizon or beyond the horizon technologies in the energy space. So I think we'll learn a lot from how that has materialized, how the politics of it has worked, how the financing of it has worked, and certainly how the technology of it has worked and is working. But before we move on to Dr. Majumdar, Mr. Prabhu, your reflections on the theme, sir.
So good evening to all of you. We are very happy that all of you could come, as my friend Arunabha said, at a very odd hours, because this is not a good time to have a discussion, because some of you must have left your work behind and come here. So thank you very much for doing that. We in India currently keep talking about one overarching issue. It says that India is suffering from policy paralysis. So of course sometimes I wonder, when you say paralysis, means some other part of the body is working, because paralysis normally means that. But even if whatever it means, because I'm not a doctor in any case, but this paralysis or this lack of action on part of governments, it should not necessarily be now looked into as a contemporary issue. For a long time, we have ignored a very important aspect of a public policy which affects our national security, economic development, social issues, and that's the issue really speaking about how we should deal with our energy challenges. We have quite a few challenges there because most of our energy, particularly oil, is imported into India. There is more of gas to the gas issue because there's not really a gas coming out as much as we thought. But we really have a real big challenge there. And therefore, what we should really be looking at in India is how are we going to secure India's future in terms of making adequate energy available for our economic development, for removing social disparities, and ensuring that this energy that is available to us is available in a manner that will never make us compromise with any of our security concerns. And that's a major challenge for India. And we have talked about it for a long time, but not much action has been taken. Probably the only tangible action that we could see was preparing the comprehensive integrated energy policy, in which we could only say that how insecure we are in terms of, we are saying now our imports are going to increase from 65% currently to 85%. So that's the best we did. But not really addressing those questions that raised by the policy in terms of how are you going to do that? How are you going to get more security? So this is a major challenge for India. And in that, it's not just type of energy that we need. We cannot just get any form of energy to make this happen. It's also the other aspect of the challenge is the type of energy that we get, the type of energy we consume should not lead to make the world worse off than what it is today. And therefore, making a challenge addressed in a manner that we address the core challenge, but in the process we do not create any other issue. And that's what, really speaking, we are really facing the dilemma today. Making energy available, affordable rates, in a manner that is secure, but also it is sustainable really. And that's what we really are looking forward to now listening to Dr. Majumdar, whom I can see in the audience, some of my friends who were there in Washington, D.C., when for a brief time, Dr. Majumdar spoke about the future scenarios. And we are so impressed. It is like really peeping into a future. It was really not a science fiction movie that we are looking at when he talked about it, but it looked like that really if we move towards that scenario, how well we will be as a world. And therefore, I am really going to looking forward to it. For India, it's not an issue of India's energy future. The question is, without energy, do we have a future? And that's what really is a question that we really need to address. And therefore, how do you actually make this happen is a major challenge for India. Some countries are very lucky, like USA, who have now discovered huge shale gas and also shale oil. China is going to have almost 40% of the projected shale gas reserves, so they are very fortunate. It seems that India has still not discovered gold in that respect. We are importing gold, of course, but not discovered that again. But now we really need to find out how, in that sense, these sources of energy which are known today are not available in abundance. What are those energy options for India as well? What could be done in this particular manner? Where should be our research and development really be focusing on? And how you can collaborate with global players to make that happen? These are some of the issues that we are going to be facing in the years to come. So I'm very happy that Dr. Majumdar, though was now a citizen of U.S., was Under Secretary in the Department of Energy, but was born in India, had lived in Delhi for some time, and also spent some time in Mumbai learning about many aspects of this energy issues. So I look forward to listening to him. Thank you very much once again for joining us. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, can you hear me at the back? Okay, very good. Well, first of all, let me thank Mr. Prabhu for your leadership in terms of energy, environment, and water. Sometimes we sort of split that apart into little buckets and try to solve them, but it is an integrated issue, and appreciate your welcome. I also want to thank Mr. Tarun Das and Dr.
Dr. Ghosh for inviting me and making all the arrangements. It so happens that my name is also Arunava, the full name, but I changed it to Arun just to avoid confusion with Dr. Ghosh. So I thought I'll give you some insights about a paper. I'll start with a paper that Secretary Chu, Stephen Chu, and I wrote right while I was leaving the Department of Energy. And it came out, and we took this opportunity. Nature came to us and said, can you write something? And I said, okay, let's collaborate and do something about it. And we put our sort of thinking about the snapshot. It provides a techno-economic snapshot of where the world is going in energy. And by the way, it does not cover some important areas like the grid. It does not cover energy efficiency. We could not cover it. It's a 10-page paper. And Nature said, we can't give you more space than that. And what we did was we called for a new industrial revolution in energy. The old industrial revolution is something that we should look at. When you call it industrial revolution, let's go back in history and ask ourselves what happened in the industrial revolution. This is what happened. We called it the horsepower to horsepower. Because if you go back to the 1700s, we had animal power and human power. That's all we really had. And the Industrial Revolution has changed humankind like nothing else, because now we use not horsepower, but horsepower. A car is on the order of a few hundred horsepower. We go to the local market with 100 horses taking us there. We go across countries in high-speed train with 10,000 horses pulling us. And we go across continent in a few hours with 100,000 horses pulling us, where it used to take months to cross continents. That's what's going on. It's an amazing transformation of humankind. And not only mobility, our factories have been mechanized, our agriculture has been mechanized, and we live in homes that are lit and that are cooled and heated. So this is what we're talking about. The people in the 1700s could not have even imagined that we would be living a lifestyle like this today. So if you ask the question, what has changed? It has led to amazing economic growth. It's an exponential increase in GDP per capita, which is often considered a marker for economic progress and prosperity. So it's an exponential growth. But this has all come. The Industrial Revolution is all about how we utilize energy. Because if you look at the energy consumption, this is the map of energy consumption, and the blue is coal, the red is oil, the green is natural gas, and the rest of it is nuclear, hydro, biomass, solar, wind, etc. And in fact, the time scales is not the same in the two graphs. If you were to make the same time scale, which is this, you'll find it is an exponential increase. So GDP per capita and economic and use of fossil energy, which is part of the marker for the Industrial Revolution, they're extremely well correlated. Well, what else has changed? The world, so it's GDP per capita, but the number of people has exponentially increased. And this is the population of the world from Stone Age. And all the way down to, and you can see a little dip, which was the plague that happened. And before the Industrial Revolution, we had 700 million people in this world, and now we have 7 billion people in the world. So it's a factor of 10 increase. And the question is, where are we going in the future? And where we're going is the following. Today it's 7 billion. And by the way, that recent increase over the last 100 years from 1 billion to 7 billion has been because of technology. And that is what is called the Haber-Bosch process of making artificial fertilizers, where you take nitrogen from the atmosphere. It's a triple bond, and it is very hard to break the hydrogen triple bond. But they were able to do it to make ammonia, and ammonia became the precursor for artificial fertilizers, which led to avoiding famine and producing food to the level that can sustain 7 billion people. And if you're looking forward in the future, this is the United Nations study. The average is 10 billion by the end of this century. but the error bar is also 10 billion. So not exactly sure where that's going to go, but it all depends on the fertility of women, mostly in Africa. That's where it really comes down to. And nevertheless, let's just take 10 billion, so we're going to add 3 more billion people to this world before it sort of saturates. And the question is, if we are to keep that exponential growth, you need also then access to fossil energy, and do we have that fossil energy? And so here is now the oil, global oil reserves. And what you find is that there is no peak oil, because the technology for discovery and production has kept pace with the increase in the demand. And so now we are finding more and more oil. We go deeper and deeper in the ocean, and there is oil. And the bottom graph is, in the next 10 years, we find that we have an overcapacity for production, in which case there's a very good chance that the oil price, at least in the near future, is not going to go to $140 a barrel, but may actually come down or fluctuate. So this is now we have a lot of capacity to produce oil. The global gas reserves without U.S. shale is the top one. That keeps increasing. And if you include the shale, it's an amazing, that's been a game changer in terms of the amount of gas that we have been able to, that we can access because of the discovery using horizontal drilling and fracking of shale gas. In fact, I can talk a little bit later on about it, but this is, which countries have shale gas, and you can find in the North America, China was mentioned, and all around the world, there is shale formation and there is accessible gas. In the United States, there are all these formations, Marcellus Shale, Barnett Shale, and up there in Canada, in Alberta and all, there's a lot of shale out there. Not all shale can be fracked, but many of them can be. And if you look at the EIA projections of how much technically recoverable resource there is, you find China right up there in the front in terms of the amount of shale gas that can be recovered, and the United States is second, and so on and so forth. So there is enough. The bottom line is that there's enough hydrocarbons out there for economic growth to be sustained. But there are consequences to this, as we all know. I'm not going to talk about global warming, that the fact that the average temperature has gone up by 0.8 degrees over the average, over the past. That is well known. I think all scientifically, the literature has shown that this is clearly due to human activity and not a natural one. What has not happened is the following. If I go out on the street in Lodi Road, for example, and ask someone, okay, the global warming is 0.8 degrees has happened, what do you think? The person will probably say, who cares? 0.8 degrees, how does it affect me out here? And what has not happened in the past is the connection between the average and the edges of the distribution, the extremes. And I just want to show you a data that just came out in August of this year from Jim Hansen's group about that. And what I'll show is the following. This is the distribution. This is the Gaussian distribution. The horizontal axis is the standard deviation, normalized by standard. So 1 sigma, 2 sigma, 3 sigma. And this is the summer temperature, 80s, 90s, 2000, okay, decades, all the way out here. So what you find is that this distribution of temperature, it's not the mean. The mean has only gone up by 0.8 degrees. But the tails of the distribution has surely shifted to the right. The tails of the distribution are now reaching 5 sigma of the original distribution, which is an extremely unlikely event, but that is what is going on. And the distribution is broadened, which means that we are now reaching extremes of temperature. Now this is still, the distribution is globally averaged, spatially averaged. The question is, where is this happening? And I'd just like to highlight where this is happening. This is, if you look at the bottom chart out there, you find that the brown is above 3 sigma and above, and the pink is minus 3 sigma and below. So you find 1955, 1965, 1975, that's been the distribution of these temperatures. How much deviation have you had? And the middle row is 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. And there's an unmistakable trend out here that you're getting to more brown than pink, okay, which is what you saw earlier. What you also see is that look at the 2010 one. You find that there's this big hotspot near Eastern Europe, which was the massive heat wave that you had in Moscow. And in 2012, which the data is not yet there, you'll find there's probably a hotspot, the massive hotspot in the United States, because the Midwest states had probably one of the worst, it was the worst heat wave in the last 100 years, more than the 1930s, what is called the Dust Bowl time that was there in the United States. So these are the consequences that we are likely to face in the future, and this is not going to abate unless we do something about it. So you ask the question, okay, since we're talking about industrial revolution, since the beginning of the industrial revolution, how much CO2 have we actually emitted? Cumulative, over the last 250 years. How much CO2 have we emitted? The answer is about 1 trillion tons. Okay, cumulative over 250 years, trillion tons. Then you ask the question, which is a valid question, how much more CO2 can we emit based on known fossil fuel reserves? Note that the known fossil fuel reserves are changing. We are finding more and more reserves. But based on known today, if you burn all those, the carbon, how much CO2 can we emit? And the number is about 3 trillion tons. So 3 times more than what we have emitted over the last 250 years. And you ask the question, given the economic growth and the carbon intensity and everything, how long will it take to burn all that carbon based on our current trends? And the answer is 75 to 100 years. Okay, in the next 75 to 100 years, we're probably going to burn all this CO2 given our current rate of use of energy, etc. So we will probably burn 3 times more carbon, produce 3 times more CO2 in 1/3 the time than what has happened in the past. So there you got a factor of 10 right out there. But here's the dilemma. So no one wants to do that, but here's the dilemma. The dilemma is that that carbon is worth tens of trillions of dollars. So here's the dilemma, is how can we ask someone to keep tens of trillions of dollars down there and not use it for economic growth? And that is the question everyone is facing. So I'm going to use a quote, and we used it in our paper. The Stone Age did not come to an end because we ran out of stones. This is Sheikh Ahmed Yamani, who's a former oil minister of Saudi Arabia. And we added in our paper, is because we transitioned to better solutions. Okay? We transitioned out of Stone Age because we found better solutions. And that's really the question we have to ask, is what are those better solutions in the future that is better than what we have today? And to do that, we have to really understand energy as a system. And there are many aspects to this system. One way to look at this is the following. That in energy system, there are 2 types. One is stationary power. We produce electricity, distribute in a grid, and use it mostly in buildings and homes and industry. And the second system is the transportation system, which is based mostly on oil and is used in vehicles, cars, trucks, etc., and planes. These 2 systems really don't interact with each other. At least today, they don't interact with each other. So we can consider them independently, which is a good thing. So that's one way to look at it holistically as a system. The other way to look at a system is that in each of those circles out there, there are technologies being developed and improved upon. And so you can take the 3rd and 4th dimension to this graph and look at it this way. That is, in every technology, in each of the circles, there's something called a learning curve. That in the y-axis, in the vertical axis, is cost of a technology over performance, and the horizontal axis is scale and volume. In energy, cost and scale is everything. You've got to be able to scale something. It has to be cheaper. The performance has to go up. So every technology goes down a learning curve. That means the more and more we do, the better we become. That means you have better performance and lower cost. And that's how you take air conditioners, batteries, coal-fired power plant, steam turbines. Everything goes through learning curves. And up front is technology innovation. Then you have manufacturing or scaling of those innovations, and finally deployment. So this is a learning curve, and just to map where the Department of Energy in the United States is, there are many applied energy programs like the Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Program Office, Fossil Energy Office. Their job, the applied energy programs, their job is to use science and engineering to help technologies go down, current technologies go down a learning curve, which is evolutionary, which is extremely important. People think everything will be revolutionary. No, it's important to keep going down a learning curve so that it's an assurance, it's an insurance policy, and it's very important to do that. Evolution is important. ARPA-E's job, which is, I'm going to come to the history of that, our job was to create entirely new learning curves. So go back to science and try out do R&D based on science for breakthrough technologies that create entirely new learning curves. Early up there, it could be more expensive, it could be less, lower performance, but that's okay. And in the process, you see these crosses, those are failures. That means this is risky proposition by its very nature because there's no assurance it's going to work. It's an idea. We don't call them failures. We call them opportunities to learn and go back again. But there's a chance that there is one learning curve, like the next generation battery that will make the lithium-ion batteries obsolete, that will go down below in cost and higher performance, that will create an entirely new learning curve, which will be disruptive to the current learning curve in the best sense of the word. And so the idea is that, at least in the United States, is to have the assured path, and you have to have this disruptive path so that the nation as a whole can get the benefit of both, and so that the nation as a whole can go down and have an inflection point and then transition to a new path and keep innovating. Now that the new curve becomes a new learning curve, innovate again and create other new learning curves and keep going. That was the idea, so that you have both of them. Because if you do not innovate, someone else in the world will. But if you go down this path, it costs money. And just to be plain and simple, this is the orders of magnitude. In the early stages where the government supports research, their typical project is a few $1 million, it's 2 to 5 years or so. But when you get to manufacturing, the risk has to be reduced because the capital is higher, and it goes orders of magnitude higher. And so access to low cost and long-term capital, long-term, more than 20 years, because any technology, new technology, will take 15 to 20 years for it to be fully deployed. Access to low-cost, long-term capital is very important. And of course, you need the markets, whether it's a domestic market or global market, you need the markets. And you can have, of course, the businesses, the consumers, the government itself, in the United States at least, is the biggest user of energy. The military is the biggest user of energy. So why not use that as a to prime the system to create to bring some of these technologies down the learning curve. So that's the whole idea. Now, I was asked to give a history of ARPA-E. So let me just do that very quickly. The history goes back to 1957. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets launched something called Sputnik. And this was a satellite, the first satellite up in the air, and it would beep, and you could pick it up on your radio. And everyone in the United States and the world could hear this. And that sent shockwaves in the United States. They said now the Soviets would look down upon us, and essentially people could play out all kinds of scenarios. So at that time, it was President Eisenhower. That he and others decided that while it is important for us to have a sort of a military angle to this, but maybe this is the time to invest in science and engineering and technology, which is where, if you look at the 60s, beyond Eisenhower, when Kennedy took over, there was a massive expansion in science and engineering. As part of that expansion, there was a new organization that was created in 1958 that reported directly to President Eisenhower called DARPA. And DARPA was asked to do it, to look for quantum leaps in technology, not just incremental. And out of that, over the last 50 years, came out the internet, TCP/IP, and the packet switching technology was created with DARPA. It was called ARPANET before the word internet was created. Stealth technology, this was all started in the 1970s. GPS along with the Air Force and Navy, DARPA got in, created GPS, and now, of course, we have it on all our cell phones and things like that. Those were the quantum leaps. So no pressure on us. We were supposed to do the same for energy. So that was the mandate. So the history goes as follows. Round about 2005 or 2006, there was a committee that was formed called the Rising Above the Gathering Storm Committee that was led by this gentleman, who's Norm Augustine, who was the former chairman and CEO of Lockheed Martin, member of the National Academy of Engineering. And he led a team to look at, he was asked by Congress to look at, tell us where the weaknesses are for the United States. So they wrote this report called Rising Above the Gathering Storm that was happening. That was 2005, 2006, where they made the recommendation that just like